Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. We're excited to have Celess Tyrell here today. She has been long in the making here to get on this show, has been busy, especially at the end of the summer, but came to us, I believe, from James Parker with Digital, yeah? Mm-hmm. He spoke so highly of you, and we're really excited to dive into the world of online learning and community management and so forth. This isn't a topic that we've necessarily dove deep into in the past. So I'm excited to get started. But Celeste, maybe you have a really unusual position to be a part of a lot of different organizations. Could you tell us a little bit about your roles amongst all the organizations?
Sure. So I work with a management firm and we manage multiple specialty nursing organizations, but I work with 6 of them. For all 6, I manage their online learning, so facilitating their webinars, hybrid events, virtual events, on-demand learning, but I also work with their online communities. Their online communities are professional networking communities that are member benefits only, and I handle social media for a few of our clients as well. And I've also worked with a lot of our committees, task forces, strategic planning groups. I have my hands in a lot of things with our associations.
That's interesting. I mean, when I think about someone being able to go across different associations, all in nursing, which you would assume that there's some common threads, but I would assume in each of the disciplines of the different nursing, there might be some different things that you have to manage from a messaging perspective. How do you manage bringing consistency of messaging across the nursing world, but then delineate between the associations that you're working for to be sure that the content you're delivering to those is specific to the discipline that they're in? Or is that even an issue?
Yeah, it's really not an issue, I would say, because I know my clients so well now, so it's not too tricky. But, I'm on regular staff calls, so I know what's going on with each of the organizations. I know what's important to them to be promoting. I have some board liaisons. So not only when it comes to our messaging about our own materials, right? Our publications, our conferences, that's easy. But when it comes to messaging, maybe about content we're pushing out or things we're promoting that aren't specific to us, understanding, is the leadership on board with this? So I work pretty closely with different liaisons within the organizations to make sure that the messaging that goes out aligns with the mission of the organization, for sure.
It's really cool. So we talked just before we jumped on about some of the success you've had sort of we called pre-COVID, and then some accelerators through COVID. Like, if you could touch on what are some of the things that you think have made your campaigns or your education or your professional development, successful?
Sure. So nurses historically need what's called contact hours. They would call them CEs or CNEs. Their new term is NCPD, Nursing Professional Continuing Development. So pre-COVID, and I would say let's go back a decade ago, the whole idea of building an online learning platform was still newer a decade ago, or I should say 15 years ago when we were starting, right? So just the concept of it existing, just because it's there doesn't mean they will come. So we spent a lot of time thinking about, well, how do we get them there? So I think one of the first areas of growth that we saw was we offered a monthly free session to our members. Every month we emailed them and said, here's your free session, come. And we saw within 2 to 3 years that our revenue doubled. So we knew that people were visiting and then they were purchasing more. And then we've seen continued growth since then. Now, I'm not saying the growth was all because of the free CE. We've also done some other things to market the education. And part of that is listening to what members are saying. So listening in our online community. Well, what are they saying they need? Do we have what they need? If we don't have what they need, can we create that quickly? Or if it's there and they're not finding it, how can we make it more accessible? And when I say listening, we have an open forum that all members are automatically added to, and each morning they receive what's called a daily digest that has their communications that happened the day before. Every night I go in and I skim and I see what's there. Now, really, that's something I should probably give up, right? And ask another staff person to do it. But I want to see what they're saying, because it helps inform how we're going to market our education, or even, I can let our conference committee know, hey, they're talking about this. I don't think we have a session on it. Maybe consider adding this to the agenda for our next meeting, things like that.
there's so much value in that conversation piece. I mean, a lot of associations is becoming the trend. We're getting there in the industry, that building more community. And the original intent, my understanding was, hey, let's build some community so that these members can engage, and we create sort of a community where there is member-to-member engagement and they can network and find each other and ask questions. And I think there's a ton of value in that. But maybe sometimes missing is how valuable it is for the association to be involved in the conversation, right? And what you learn, and we think about that and what you could learn from there. I'd be curious, like, what are some of the things like more that you would learn from that community just by being engaged yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So here's an example. This was probably 6-7 years ago now. There were a few members. So nephrology, for example, there are 8 to 9 different specialties within nephrology. And we have different, we call them specialty practice networks, spins. And we had a few members of our transplant spin saying, hey, I don't see any education on transplant. ANNA needs to like bump up their transplant content. But I knew, because I managed our online learning, we had content on transplant, but we have 2 national meetings a year. We might do a session or 2 in each meeting. So when they were going to visit the online learning, they were clicking on a particular conference skim, they would just see 1 or 2 sessions. So what we did was we took those sessions, we bundled them together and called it a transplant package, and then marketed specifically to this spin. And then I realized, well, wait, there's probably other spins that maybe feel the same way. So then we started bundling content based on specialty. It seems like an elementary thing, like, well, why weren't we doing that? I don't know why we weren't, but the reason we thought to do it is because we saw them saying that in the community. Or, you know, things like, I don't really have a lot of time. I need things in smaller chunks. Well, then we created a series called a CE Express that were just 15-20 minute chunks that they were successful for a long time. So it's noticing those things. And, you know, there's lots of ways to automate listening, right? So in our online community, we have like automation rules. If a member does this, then they get this email and then this happens. But that's different than an actual set of eyes looking at it and understanding what they're saying and paying attention to it.
It seems like a better way to do things than surveying per se. But it also, what I really love about this is that you've applied seemingly what a lot of, like, in the marketing industry, a lot of people now know, okay, we can create these big pieces of content and then we break them down to sizable, you know, bite-sized pieces of content, and then we put them out through all different channels. And it feels like you've taken that practice from a marketing perspective and applied it to online learning in a way that helps people learn at their own pace, but also learn in the format that they might be willing to learn in. Have there been any big advances in the last few years, or something that's like completely shifted for you that seemed very non-traditional in the past, and maybe the nurses even wouldn't be willing to learn in a particular way, that you've been able to like change some of that through technology or innovation or anything?
Yeah, well, I would say just the whole concept of, well, pre-COVID, right? Most of our sales were on-demand learning. People, so we have, say, 9,000 members, and on site we'd have 400 to 600 at our largest meeting, 200 to 300 come, and then most of the sales were on-demand learning. But the whole idea of a virtual event and participation in the virtual event is something that's really shifted. And we've learned that, obviously, we know when someone goes to a meeting, they're not coming to a meeting. It's not just about the education, because they can do it on demand. They're coming for more than that. They're coming for an experience or to network, right? Well, then how does that translate virtually? And we weren't sure about that. But one thing we've learned is that because they had no choice, and if they wanted that education, they couldn't go to the meeting, they were doing it virtually. We learned that they actually really love online learning, live online learning. And we've seen nurses who have never, ever attended our conferences before, who are attending virtually and then saying things like, oh, I can't wait to meet you in person now. And so what we're hoping is we're developing this new audience that will eventually translate to an on-site person, and then someone who hopefully eventually becomes a member as well. And so that's been interesting to watch happen because historically, pre-COVID, when we had this mini virtual event, you know, we had maybe 50 to 75 people, but now we're seeing hundreds of people attending virtual events. And we're seeing, and again, going back to watching, you know, while they're participating, they're chatting. There's this, like, the session's happening, but there's a text chat, watching what they're saying. Oh, I can't wait to come and be there in person. Or, you know, another benefit of this online learning model too is they're having content related discussions while a session's happening that they can't do in person.
Right.
It's like the hallway talk. Well, the hallway talk
Right.
can happen the entire time when online learning is taking place. If of course the model that you're using allows for it, you know.
Yeah. Now I can see why James Parker loved you so much, because I didn't imagine Digital. This is like right up Digital's alley. But I think that, that's an interesting point. And I hadn't heard that before, but it totally makes sense, is that the disruptive conversation that would not happen at a live event, meaning someone's not going to go and be rude to a speaker and talk next to their neighbor. Well, you'd hope not. Now with that online chat feature, you are able to sort of see in real time and adjust to what are things that are coming up. Sort of eliminates the need or desire after the conference. It's like everyone saved their questions to the last second and then bum rush the stage waiting for the speaker to get off so they could ask some questions. And now like the speakers are able to interact actually throughout the experience. That has to add a lot of good networking and feeling to the conversation.
Yeah. And we're even seeing, which again, this was surprising to me, and I'll be interested to see how this evolves. We had our first in-person meeting in September, and we had 60% of our participation was virtual. 40% was in person. But in the room, we saw people logging into the live stream because they wanted to participate in the chat with the virtual audience. So, it's bridging two audiences, which is really cool, but also noticing how they're really valuing that type of learning, and it's not just the networking, it's content learning. It's specific to the content that's being presented, but they're learning peer-to-peer while it's being presented. And then if they miss something because they're busy chatting, the model we use, they can access it later and listen to it over and over again. Yeah,
I've attended my fair share at this point of virtual events, and I couldn't do it unless I had that community. Like to sit here and watch a virtual event, I think is one thing, but to participate, and I have to do that. So I have that desire to get back to live events, and when they happen, I'm there. But it's for that interaction, and you can learn so much from what people are saying person to person. So the access that you could get from a virtual event within that community conversation piece is fascinating. I'd not heard of somebody going to a live event and then logging back into the virtual community to have conversations, but I probably will do that now if that's an option.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm walking into the room and I'm looking around and I see that they have their laptops and iPads out and they're watching the stream in the room. And I'm like, well, I wasn't thinking that would happen, but it did. And then I asked, because, I know a lot of these members, and I asked, hey, I thought that they wanted to see the slides closer to their screen, but they're like, no, we just wanted to be in the chat with the other attendees. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's great. Yeah.
What's interesting about that is, if I think about the trend like a few years ago, and my background being in events, I remember when we would try to, like at Audi one time, we created like an app for the event where people could chat there, or it became very popular for events to create hashtags for their events and constantly push people to like, hey, go tweet about this, tweet about that. I'm wondering, have you seen actually a challenge or an opportunity in melding those two things together? Because I would assume that once you bring the online chats, like all of a sudden, well, wait, now I can actually just have this conversation with everyone I'm attending the event with, versus feeling like I need to go out to social media. However, going out to social media and hashtagging and putting up questions and interesting sessions was allowing for some marketing of the event to people that might not be there. Have you seen any of that? We didn't prep you with that question, but it just came.
No, I have. So actually, again, pre-pandemic, when we used to, none of us were really streaming much. We had a meeting app and we had it set up so if they made a tweet, they could sync it to their Twitter account, it would go out live, and it was perfect. The app that we did use was bought out, and then we were just like, okay, well, we're venturing into hybrid. What do we do? We knew that the virtual platform we were using had a lot of those tools already. So we were like, okay, we're just going to use our virtual event platform as the meeting app, so to speak. But we still need the social media piece. So what we did was, because I wanted to make sure we were still pushing out content on social. So I actually asked a team of volunteers that I know well to be tweeting for me the entire time with the meeting hashtag. And in the virtual learning platform where attendees were watching it, there was a Twitter feed with the meeting hashtag as well.
Okay, cool.
So what we did was, even though they were chatting and they were really involved, multiple times, I posted in the chat, hey, if you're on Twitter, please use this meeting hashtag. You'll see your tweet in the bottom right. And I showed them where it would be. And then we started seeing them tweet too, because they wanted people to see their tweet in the Twitter feed. So it was intentional. I made sure that I had a core group of volunteers who were either tweeting or sending me content, because I was so busy on site and I couldn't do what I wanted to do. But we had to be more intentional about it for sure. But it worked out well. It worked out well.
I like the idea that you can offer both, right? There are some people who very much want to push their stuff out to Twitter. And if you can make that as easy as possible, like that's awesome. And there are some people who just kind of want their conversations to be community only. And there's almost like a warm blanket of like knowing this isn't out on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. And I just want to have that interaction with sort of my peers.
Right.
Yeah. And that's actually an interesting thing that came up when it comes to the chat that was exclusive to the people participating in the virtual event. So many attendees said, oh, I wish we could get a copy of this chat. There was so much good content in it. And there was. But then from a privacy perspective, we're like, we can't do that. Like, even if we disclosed it up front, we thought it would hinder the chat that was happening. So the content of that chat was so good, people wanted to read it later. But we haven't done that yet. And that's something that we are continuing to think through. You know, do we maybe consider having somebody review the chat logs, remove things like employer names, and, you know, do we do that if we disclose it up front? It's something we're working through because the content of the chat was so good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So many testimonials and quotes within there. I mean, you could pull stuff out, I assume, and then go ask members, hey, would you mind if we sort of shared this comment because we thought it was so great?
Well, actually, so whenever we have any webinar or virtual event, I have a staff person assigned to be in there to monitor the chat and grab screenshots the entire time and the person's name so we can reach back out, because yes, there's so much good stuff. And the thing is, they'll be quick to type in our chat. They're not going to be as quick to complete our survey at the end, right? Sure. So we get those little tidbits in the chat, and that's what we can use for promo for sure.
Really probably also safeguards you from having the conversations that should just be in the chat and people not needing to go to Twitter with some of the things. And so you started giving them both avenues. But
that is true.
Well, as you guys know, I'm usually the party pooper that has to round us up, but I got to round us up because we're getting close to time. Although this could have been a total educational series all on its own, online learning for you guys getting to tune in and hear all these wonderful tidbits of advice on how to run your online community during your events. Celeste, that's so great. I mean, these were a lot of really good tips and for the trade for people who are running online events in the future or hybrid events. Because that's really exciting to hear that, you know, you're able to really quickly. I mean, a lot of people were able to go on virtual, but I don't know how many people were able to quickly assimilate what was happening before from a social perspective, from a listening perspective, and from a virtual perspective. So bravo on all of that. But really quickly, of course, as we always wrap up, we would love to know if there's somewhere out there that you think we should be speaking to next that could perhaps take us in a whole new direction or expand on another topic we've already talked about before.
Sure, yeah. So Melissa Patterson is a colleague of mine. She worked at the same management firm I did for years, but she is currently the director of operations at the American Society of Transplantation. She is just a big picture thinker. She's very strategic in her thought, and she's really great when it comes to actually strategically thinking about technology from a layperson's perspective and from a user's perspective. She's a great team lead. She's great at coaching staff, changing management, and she's just gets the association space. And she has a background actually, and we didn't really talk about this at all, but certification. So many of our organizations have a whole certification board, and she has a background with that as well.
Awesome. Well, transplant certainly close to our heart, as is nephrology. So we really appreciate you getting to talk to you offline about all of that stuff. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all these really wonderful insights around this. Again, it's always just, Lucas, wouldn't you say it's so great whenever we have these, because I always think, oh, we're probably going to back over some other content we've done, and we just haven't yet.
No,
it's awesome.
I keep finding new people that have great content, and it's, we said it before, like great people recommending great people like this. It's an awesome series.
Yeah, and this is the first time we had someone wanting to refer to us, someone that's already been on the show. So yay. It's going 3 degrees. We're gonna have to change the name. It's gonna be 3 degrees of associations, right? So, rebrand everything. Well, thank you, Celeste, so much. You've been an absolute pleasure to speak with, and such energy and wonderful advice there. So we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.